The sound of marching boots echoed in the damp air of a foreign training camp. A group of young soldiers, faces hardened by mud and exhaustion, stood under the blazing sun. Their uniforms were torn, their hands blistered, and yet their eyes burned with something rare: determination. Among the observers that day stood a quiet man, a Japanese military expert known for his blunt honesty and decades of experience. He had trained soldiers across Asia, from the disciplined ranks of Japan's self-defense forces to the elite units of South Korea and Thailand. But what he saw that morning left him speechless. He would later confess in an interview that shocked many. "No soldier trains like a Filipino." Those 6 words rippled through military circles like a secret long kept. How could he say that? Japan's soldiers are known for their discipline, their precision, their unyielding respect for hierarchy. Yet here was a Japanese expert, one who had spent his life building warriors, admitting something almost unthinkable. But what did he mean by that? The story begins not in Japan nor in the Philippines, but in a remote military base in Southeast Asia where soldiers from different countries came together for joint exercises. It was supposed to be routine, a week of drills, combat simulations, and survival training. But what happened in those fields would change the way many viewed the Filipino soldier forever. The Japanese expert, let's call him Colonel Sato, watched as teams from various nations took turns navigating obstacle courses, marksmanship tests, and tactical challenges. He noted patterns: the precision of Japanese units, the discipline of the Koreans, the toughness of the Thais. Yet when it came time for the Filipinos to train, something unexpected happened. They didn't just follow orders. They adapted. They improvised. They made the impossible work, with fewer resources, older equipment, and sheer grit. Sato saw a team of Filipino soldiers facing a live fire simulation, their rifles jammed mid-drill. Others would have paused, signaled for replacement, followed protocol. But the Filipinos, they didn't stop. They fixed the weapon mid-combat, communicated wordlessly, and completed the drill faster than anyone else. Later, Sato was seen shaking his head, smiling slightly, the kind of smile that hides deep respect. When asked what he thought, he replied, "They don't just train to follow commands, they train to survive. That's the difference." And that difference, he explained, comes from history, from generations of resilience, struggle, and adaptation. Think about it. The Philippines has faced colonization, wars, disasters, and hardship. From the jungles of Bataan to the streets of Marawi, Filipinos have fought not just with weapons, but with heart. Their soldiers learned early on that sometimes survival depends not on strength alone, but on resourcefulness, on knowing how to turn every disadvantage into an edge. Have you ever wondered why Filipino soldiers are often chosen for peacekeeping missions around the world? Why they are trusted in the harshest environments, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Africa? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you think makes the Filipino spirit different, because even Colonel Sato admitted he had never seen anything quite like it. When asked to describe Filipino soldiers in one word, he paused. Then he said, "Unbreakable." But what made him use such a powerful word? To understand that, we need to go back, decades before Sato's observation, to the roots of Filipino military culture. From the early revolutionaries who stood against Spanish rule to the guerrilla fighters of World War II, every generation of Filipino warriors carried something invisible in their training: a fierce love of freedom and an instinct to protect their people at any cost. Filipino soldiers were not built in luxury or trained with the best gear. They were shaped in struggle, forged by hunger, humidity, and hardship. Their battlefields were not pristine academies, but muddy rice fields, dense forests, and war-torn towns. Maybe that's why, when others train for perfection, Filipinos train for survival. And that's exactly what Sato witnessed. One night during the exercises, a tropical storm hit the camp. Flooded trenches, lightning overhead, and zero visibility. Training was supposed to stop, but the Filipino unit didn't seek shelter. They continued the drill, adjusting their strategy mid-storm. They tied ropes, improvised cover, and kept their composure while others took refuge. Sato reportedly said to a fellow officer, "They're not following orders. They're following instinct." That night, something shifted in the perception of everyone watching. The Japanese expert, known for his cool and clinical assessments, saw something beyond tactics. He saw character, and it humbled him. Now here's the question. Do you think true military strength comes from technology and weapons, or from mindset and adaptability? Share your answer in the comments. I'm curious to see how you view it. If you're enjoying this deep dive into this hidden truth, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it, because what comes next might just change the way you look at the word discipline forever. Because Sato's confession didn't end there. He didn't just praise Filipino soldiers. He questioned why Japan, despite its power, could never replicate that kind of heart. In a rare recorded statement, he said, "Japan can build machines. The Philippines builds warriors." But what exactly did he mean by that? It's a story that dives deep into culture, mindset, and something beyond training, something that can't be measured in drills or scores. And what Sato revealed next left even his fellow officers in stunned silence. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. The training grounds were soaked, boots caked in mud, rifles dripping with rainwater. Yet the Filipino soldiers stood in perfect formation, waiting for the next command. Not because someone told them to, but because discipline for them wasn't a rule. It was a rhythm that lived in their blood. Colonel Sato watched them quietly from under his cap. The night before, he'd seen something he couldn't explain, a kind of defiance mixed with humility. It wasn't arrogance. It was resolve. He later said, "They don't fear exhaustion. They fear disappointing their unit." That line would later echo across forums and military discussions. What did he mean by that? Unlike many forces that measure success in medals or ranks, Filipino soldiers measure it in loyalty to their brothers, to their mission, and to the people they protect. For them, the unit is sacred. When one falls, all carry his memory. That emotional bond is something no training manual can replicate. Sato noticed it in small moments. When one soldier offered the last of his water to another, when they shared food during rations, when laughter broke out even after a grueling march. There was a lightness that didn't come from ignorance, it came from spirit. He began to ask himself, what makes them this way? When he returned to Japan, Sato dug into the history of the Philippines, not as a military man, but as a curious student. And what he found fascinated him. He discovered that long before modern armies, the Filipino warrior tradition was already alive. From the fierce tribes of Mindanao to the Tagalog warriors of the north, Filipinos had a deep sense of Bayanihan, community spirit, the idea that strength comes not from one, but from all. That cultural DNA, Sato realized, was the secret ingredient. He even compared it to the Bushido code of Japan, the way of the samurai, where honor and loyalty define the warrior. Yet, there was something different about the Filipino spirit. Bushido was about discipline through control. The Filipino code was about discipline through compassion. In one interview, he explained, "A Japanese soldier fights for honor. A Filipino soldier fights for life, his own and everyone else's. That makes him unpredictable and unstoppable." And that unpredictability, he said, was what modern militaries often lack. Can you imagine a world where armies trained not only for precision but also for empathy and adaptability? Do you think that would make them stronger or softer? Let me know what you think in the comments. Your answer might surprise you. Sato's revelations sparked quiet discussions among officers in Japan's defense circles. Some agreed, some didn't. But all admitted one thing: Filipino soldiers had a different kind of resilience. He told a story that became legend among those who trained with the Philippine Army. During one of the exercises, a sudden equipment failure forced a Filipino unit to abandon their vehicle. Instead of panicking, they took apart the damaged parts, reassembled them using scavenged tools, and managed to get the vehicle moving again, all in under an hour. When Sato asked how they learned to do that, one soldier smiled and said, "Sir, in our country, if something breaks, you fix it. We can't afford to wait." That line hit Sato deeply. In a world where militaries depend on high technology, he realized the greatest weapon was still the human mind, trained to adapt under pressure. And it wasn't just their resourcefulness, it was their endurance. During a 30-kilometer endurance march, soldiers from various nations began to fall behind. Heat exhaustion, fatigue, dehydration, the usual toll. The Filipinos kept going. No complaints, no breaks, just quiet focus and steady steps. When they reached the finish line, the officer in charge asked how they managed it. One soldier answered, "We've walked longer roads back home, and not for medals." That humility stunned everyone. Sato later wrote in his personal notes, "Their pain tolerance is not born from training, it's born from life." Maybe that's what he meant when he said, "No soldier trains like a Filipino," because Filipino soldiers don't train to impress. They train to survive. They train to protect. They train knowing that one day they might be the only barrier between chaos and home. And that sense of purpose makes every drill more than just repetition. It becomes a promise. Have you ever done something difficult, not because you wanted recognition, but because you couldn't stand to let others down? That's what drives these men and women. If you're still watching and this story inspires you, make sure to hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And if you want to see more powerful truths about untold warriors of the world, subscribe now and join us for future episodes. Because what Sato discovered next takes this story even deeper. During a visit to Manila, he met retired Filipino veterans, men who had fought in World War II, the Korean War, and even Vietnam. They shared stories that sounded almost mythical, surviving weeks behind enemy lines, rationing water from bamboo shoots, outsmarting better-equipped forces through cunning and courage. One elderly veteran told Sato, "You can train a soldier to shoot, but you can't train him to care." That line stayed with him for the rest of his life. He realized that the Filipino soldier's strength wasn't only in his skills, it was in his humanity. When others see the battlefield as destruction, Filipinos see it as protection. When others fight for power, they fight for peace. It's the same reason Filipino peacekeepers have earned global respect. In war-torn regions, they're known not just for bravery, but for compassion, helping rebuild villages, caring for children, sharing food with locals even when supplies are low. Sato once said, "They win hearts before they win wars." That mindset, blending strength with kindness, baffled many militaries that believed in pure aggression. But to Sato, it was genius. He compared it to water. Soft yet unstoppable, gentle yet powerful. And he concluded something few dared to say aloud. If every soldier in the world trained like a Filipino, maybe wars would end faster, or never begin at all. What do you think? Can compassion really be a weapon? Drop your thoughts below. I want to know what side you're on. But as Sato continued his journey, he stumbled upon something even more surprising. A secret that connected the Japanese way of discipline with the Filipino way of resilience. A revelation buried deep in history that explained why these two nations, though once enemies, shared a spiritual link in their warrior code. And when Sato uncovered that connection, it changed everything he believed about what makes a true soldier. Years later, in a quiet corner of Tokyo, Colonel Sato sat in a dimly lit library surrounded by old books, military archives, and war diaries. He had been obsessed ever since his time training alongside Filipino soldiers. Something about them haunted him, not in a painful way, but in a way that demanded understanding. He once said to a colleague, "It's strange. The more I study the Filipino soldier, the more I learn about what Japan lost after the war." That statement puzzled his peers. What could Japan, known for its discipline, technology, and precision, possibly have lost? Sato explained that while Japan perfected efficiency, it began to lose touch with the emotional and spiritual roots of the warrior. The samurai once lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior. Honor, loyalty, and courage were their guiding lights. But modern militaries, he said, had replaced heart with hardware. And then he drew a bold comparison. The Filipino soldier today carries what our samurai once had, a spirit that fights for meaning, not just mission. It was a controversial statement, but the more he studied, the more evidence he found. He discovered that during World War II, when Japanese forces occupied the Philippines, countless Filipinos resisted, not with high-tech weapons, but with guerrilla tactics, cunning, and faith. They fought from the shadows, often outnumbered and outgunned, yet they refused to surrender. Even Japanese officers at the time reportedly admired their courage. Some of those old reports, written in faded ink, described Filipino resistance fighters as impossible to predict, fearless, and dangerously intelligent. They could melt into the jungle, appear behind enemy lines, and vanish like ghosts. Sato realized something powerful. The spirit of those guerrillas never disappeared. It evolved into the modern Filipino soldier. He called it the spirit of the bamboo, flexible, enduring, and unbreakable. Bend it, and it returns stronger. Cut it, and it grows again. That image became a symbol in his research, the bamboo versus the steel. Japanese warriors were like forged steel, sharp, precise, but rigid. Filipino warriors were like bamboo, humble, resilient, adaptable. And in the long run, bamboo survives storms that shatter steel. He once asked in a lecture, "What's the point of a sword that can cut anything if it breaks when the wind changes?" That question silenced the room. It wasn't about which soldier was better. It was about which one truly understood the essence of survival, not just on the battlefield, but in life itself. And that's when Sato began to notice something deeper, a connection between Filipino spirituality and their fighting spirit. He traveled to Mindanao, to the mountains of Luzon, to the coastal villages of Visayas. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing, a people deeply rooted in faith, family, and community. He wrote in his journal, "A Filipino soldier does not see war as a job. He sees it as a duty to his people, to his ancestors, to the land, to his God." That, Sato believed, was what gave them endurance beyond training, a power drawn from something larger than themselves. Now let's pause for a moment. Do you think true strength comes from discipline or from faith? From technique or from purpose? Think about that, and tell me what you believe in the comments. I'd love to read your thoughts. As Sato's studies deepened, he began comparing combat philosophies. Japanese soldiers were trained to suppress emotion. Filipino soldiers, in contrast, drew strength from it. They fought with passion, with laughter even in danger, with tears for fallen brothers, with a sense of joy for every sunrise they survived. And to Sato, that made them unpredictable, because they were human first, soldiers second. He began teaching this philosophy in lectures and seminars, urging modern forces to train the heart as much as the body. But not everyone agreed. Some called him idealistic. Others said he was romanticizing hardship. Yet Sato stood firm. He once told a room full of cadets, "When a Filipino soldier stands guard, he doesn't see an enemy approaching. He sees a family he must protect behind him." That perspective changed how some Japanese officers viewed military purpose. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about protection. Sato eventually developed what he called the human element doctrine, inspired heavily by Filipino soldiers. It emphasized adaptability, emotion, and initiative, qualities that, he argued, made modern warriors not only effective, but humane. He even returned to the Philippines to share his findings with the armed forces, calling the country the world's living classroom of resilience. And the more he immersed himself, the more he saw that Filipino's strength wasn't limited to the battlefield. It was everywhere, in the farmers working under the sun, in the fishermen braving storms, in the mothers holding families together during hard times. He said, "When you train in a land where life itself is a daily fight, your soldiers will always be ready." That statement became famous, quoted in leadership seminars and documentaries years later. Sato's admiration turned into friendship. He grew close to Filipino officers who shared their own philosophies, lessons that mirrored the same humility and patience that once guided Japan's ancient warriors. It was like rediscovering an old mirror Japan had forgotten it owned. He realized that Filipino strength wasn't learned in the barracks. It was inherited through hardship, passed from generation to generation. Maybe that's why, he thought, no simulation could ever recreate what he saw in the Filipino heart. But then came his boldest confession of all, one that he shared privately in his final years, only later revealed in a memoir. He said, "In every war game I've observed, the Filipino soldiers didn't just aim to win. They aimed to end the fight quickly, to stop suffering. That's their real power. They fight because they value peace." Let that sink in. Imagine a world where every army fought with that goal, not to conquer, but to protect peace. Do you think that would make humanity stronger or weaker? Leave your thoughts below. This question might challenge what you've always believed about war and strength. Before his passing, Sato made one last visit to the Philippines. He stood before a formation of young recruits, the same kind of bright-eyed soldiers who had once stunned him years before. He told them, "The world will never forget your spirit. Train hard, not to destroy, but to preserve. Because in your hands lies the future of honor." He saluted them, tears in his eyes. It was the final salute of a man who had seen every kind of soldier, and finally found the kind he most respected. So, what made Colonel Sato say, "No soldier trains like a Filipino"? It wasn't just about endurance or courage or tactics. It was about the heart, that unshakable drive to protect, to adapt, to rise again no matter what life throws. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the strength of the human spirit. Because this truth, about resilience, compassion, and courage, deserves to be heard. And as we close this journey, let me leave you with one final question. In a world obsessed with power, what kind of soldier, what kind of person, do you think the world truly needs? Drop your answer in the comments, because maybe, just maybe, the world needs more people who train not just to fight, but to care.